A very good evening to everybody watching. Thank you for joining us tonight on the evening review. My name is Taiwan Jabela. Tonight on the platform we are joined by Dr. Audrin Mathe. He is author of this brand new book, in fact, yet to be officially dropped. It's The Art of Persuasion, and it says the making of the Namibian Constitution. It is scheduled to be dropped officially or to be launched officially on Monday here in Windhoek, and Dr. Mathe is here to walk us through some of the content of the book. It's great to have you, Doc. Congratulations, first and foremost, on this solid book. I had a perusal of it. I'm still waiting for the weekend to indulge myself properly, but congratulations on the project.
Thank you so very much indeed.
Yeah, wonderful. I think the what caught my attention is because you're talking primarily of the events around 1989, yes. The making of our Constitution, the Constituent Assembly that birthed our Constitution. Ironically, this week, the former President Genkob, this week marked the second year of the anniversary of his passing. And he's also mentioned quite extensively in the book. He talks about, some people call him the sort of, I think if I'm not mistaken, they say the father of the Namibian Constitution or something like that. I know he chaired the deliberations, but what other roles? Chairing is one thing, but he ought to have played a much bigger role there.
Indeed, it's remarkable what was going behind the scenes. And a lot of it, because it's not in the Constitution, it was not meant to be in the Constitution. It's really the facilitation of that process, where then chairperson of the assembly would actually consult most of the time individually with members of the Constituent Assembly that he thought were key to resolving disputes. For instance, he would speak very often with Art Mathe. He would speak very often with co-secretaries. He would speak often with people like Jan de Vet, just to gauge their mood on a particular subject, so that once the matter is actually brought for discussion, then he would have known where they stood, and then that made a lot of discussions a lot easier. So there were a lot of those, but there were also people like Vekuru Koro, who was legally trained, and he was key, especially when they're discussing issues around fundamental rights and freedoms. He came from a liberal background, so he was very instrumental in some of the clauses that are in the Constitution today.
Yeah. One thing that I'm only remembering now, I've never really inquired about this or even looked it up. That time, the government of Namibia didn't exist, because you could have said, look, Genkob was put there, he was delegated by the president, for example. But there was not even a president at the time. President Nyoma only became president after the fact. So these appointments and deployment of people like Bendukeni Tana and many others, how did it come about?
Once SWAPO knew what the numbers were that were going to represent the party in the Constituent Assembly, obviously the Politburo Central Committee would have met to determine who was going to play what role. You recall at some point during the first sitting of the Constituent Assembly, Nico Bessinger actually nominated President, or he wasn't President then, Sam Nyoma, to be the chairperson. Then obviously, because what was decided in the Central Committee was different from the proposal, so obviously it was just a slip of the tongue. Then he corrected himself that he nominates Hage Genkob. So that's how he got to be nominated there. Obviously, they have to take people. There were 21 members in total. I'm talking about the committee of 21 now, because the primary discussions took place at the level of the committee, group of 21. Then whatever the substantive agreements were, then they would take that to the plenary, the Constituent Assembly itself. So each party, obviously, they have to select their best brains who had some kind of knowledge on making the Constitution. Obviously, we've never drafted the Constitution before, but I think the knowledge, a lot of them were legally qualified. you had Pendukeni Tana, you had Ngarikoteke Chiriange, you had Hatmot Ruppel, who had a legal background. So they were key. Then on the political side, you had people like Theoben Gururab, you had Hidipa Mtenya, you had Hage Genikob himself. Then you had also internal leadership of SWAPO. That were Nico Bessenger, who were part of the process. So on the opposition side, they did the same. The committee was proportionally representative. So depending on what percentage you got, that's almost the number of people that will go to the committee. So FCN was there, NNF with Rukoro. First with FCN it was Hans Derhard, then he was replaced by Mbrumba Kerina. So obviously I think my assumption is that they were selected on the basis of their contribution towards the construction of the state.
I see. And just to be clear, these deliberations took place after the election, or was it before?
The results was announced on the 14th of November. It was already triggered in the regulations to say the first sitting will be 7 days after the announcement of the results. That is why the first meeting took place on the 21st of November. There were not too many discussions there, but really just to set the framework upon which negotiations were going to take place. Then subsequent meetings then took place between the 21st of November and the 8th of February. That is what constitutes now 80-day miracle negotiations. Because on the 9th, it was a day upon which there were no discussions really, but only to adopt the constitution. As you know, it was adopted unanimously. Doesn't mean that people disagreed, but everyone else figured this is the best outcome that could come out of the drafting committee.
Yeah, and it, I suppose 21 March, which was declared then as Independence Day, to this day, was a result of that, to say now we have this solid document, we can now go on and usher ourselves into a statehood of some sort.
You will be interested to know that when 21 March was set as a date of independence, the constitution was not yet adopted.
Really?
That was, it took place somewhere around the 20th of January when that proposal came. Oh, okay. It came from SWAPO through Theoben Gururab. Is the one that proposed formally the date of independence. There were two reasons. One, we knew that the mandate of UNTAG was ending on 1st or 31st of March. That means that unless the mission is extended, then independence cannot take place beyond that date. So that's why 21 March fit within the plans that were there. And secondly, President Gengob will say there was a lot of eagerness not to be continued paid by apartheid South Africa. Remember, once they took seats as members of the Constituent Assembly, they were being paid by the previous regime, and they didn't want to be controlled, and also there were a lot of security issues. So it was critical to have the date sooner rather than later. But obviously, by around the 20th of January, there was already clear indication where the constitution, the final document, was going to be leading. So they could easily make that commitment with a lot of certainty, because first of all, there was a lot of goodwill from other parties as well. That were willing to join hands with SWAPO to adopt the constitution and then eventually gain independence.
I see. The book also talks about one difficult moment that President Gengob, Chairman Gengob at the time, of course, had in informing the president of Sam Nujoma again that the opposition, of course, SWAPO had won, so the others were definitely opposition. We're proposing term limits. Yes. And Gengob he found it tricky to go and relay that to President Nujoma. Why was that difficult? Isn't that sort of the global practice? Yeah.
See, if we look at the original SWAPO proposals, there were certain things that were not there, eventually that landed in the constitution, and term limits was one of those. Again, this is not to say that there was no commitment to democracy. It has just been a practice where most of our leadership will have lived in countries where there were no term limits, including in the UK, Germany. There are not term limits in Germany and UK until now. So I suspect that must have influence in that. But during the negotiations, the opposition parties felt very strongly that if you're going to have an executive president, there have to be some kind of, his powers must be curtailed in some manner. Then term limits came. Obviously, Sopo felt very strongly that as long as people want him, it's not that he was going to be moved into the office. He was going to run for election, campaign, and win. So they were saying that as long as people keep re-electing him, there should be no problem because that's the will of the people. So that's when they prompted that, okay, Sopo has to make some concessions. And they did make a number of concessions. Chairman Gengop, then it was left up to him to explain to President Nyoma to say, this is where we are. He thought that maybe President Nyoma will not accept that. But he was just very happy to say, well, if they want 2 terms, what is the problem? Let's take it. So that's how the 2-term limit came into play.
Absolutely. Yeah. We go for a very short break and return with Dr. Audrin Mathe.
Life is unpredictable and one needs to be protected against any eventuality. Get Santam legal access from as little as 50 Namibian dollars a month for when you find yourself in need of legal representation due to civil cases, criminal prosecution, and family matters such as divorce, child maintenance, and custody. It also covers labor disputes, disciplinary hearings, and unfair dismissal or retrenchment. With Santam Legal Access, you'll receive free legal advice on almost every legal aspect, whether the specific matter is covered by your policy or not. For true peace of mind and legal protection when you need it most, call us on 061 292 8000. Santam. This is freedom.
The conversation with Dr. Mathe continues on the evening review. Again, he is the author of the brand new book, The Art of Persuasion, The Making of Namibia's Constitution, dropping on Monday. Doc, let's talk about I don't know whether I can call it an anomaly, but what transpired is that President Nyoma went on to serve 3 terms. And the technical explanation was that in 1989 he was not directly voted by the masses. If you can explain how he ascended in 1989 or around that time, how did that process unfold? And do you think that the Constituent Assembly should have or could have anticipated that situation and just make it solid already from that time so that it doesn't end up the manner in which it ended?
Indeed. See, that part of the Constitution is not entrenched, so it can be amended at any given moment. The argument at that stage, when the 3rd term was, the Constitution was amended to provide for the 3rd term, was that during the 1989 elections, let me dial back first. See, the Constituent Assembly was not elected to become a parliament. Yeah. It was only, the elections was to draw up the Constitution of the Republic of Namibia. Now, when the Constitution was adopted, was concluded, they made a provision there to say, to have another election to elect a parliament, a new government, would take a lot of effort and time. Hence, the Constituent Assembly then was transformed into the National Assembly. Yeah. Similarly, that's the argument that was used to say the first election, the National Assembly, they made a provision in the National Assembly, transitional clause, to say the National Assembly will elect the first president. Then thereafter, the president will be elected directly. Yeah. So that is the argument to say, well, the first time, President Nyoma was not elected by the people. He was elected by the National Assembly. Therefore, to make it align with the spirit of the Constitution, therefore, we should amend it so that he gets a chance to run for 2 terms, elected directly. Mm-hmm. Whereas the first one, he was elected by the National Assembly. Obviously, again, the President Nyoma was still young. You can say it that way. He was 59 years when he became president. And there was a desire to continue building the nation. As you know, he held the country very well together. And we needed a leader like him at independence. And I think this is the views that were explained by SWAPO to say, we desire for our leader to be elected directly twice by the people so that then he can complete the process of nation building that he had started at 1990.
Yeah, very good. Do you think that in the deliberations of the Constituent Assembly that despite the political differences, you have SWAPO and the opposition parties, and they were, according to the book, they were vigorous deliberations, people almost confronting each other about issues that they felt passionate about. Do you think that everybody, despite their political persuasions, were genuine about their input, or do you think there might have been some people with strings being pulled elsewhere? There are insinuations, for example, there were feelings within SWAPO in particular, according to the book, that Geingob used the word puppet, according to the book, where he says he felt that maybe people who collaborated with South Africa prior to that period might have still had South Africa behind their back, pulling their strings and saying, go then and say that things must be done this way. Do you think everybody was working for Namibia, or do you think there might have been pockets of those?
This constitution is sort of the conflict resolution mechanism that we needed to adopt to create a future for our country. Each side, they had fears that they regarded as genuine from their perspective.
Yeah.
If you take the perspective of white Namibians, they had a lot of propaganda that said SWAPO is going to take over your wives and your children, and then they're going to take over your farms and all of that. So it played a role in the attitude during the constitution making Because when you say that we want land redistribution, it already triggers what they've been fearing all along. Yeah. And a number of these fears, they were completely unknown. As they got to know each other, they realize that all of us want the same thing. Maybe how we want it is what must lead us to negotiations, so that we find a common solution for both of us. And I think that's what it was. If you look at whether the president should be executive or ceremonial, the opposition parties felt very strongly about having a ceremonial president, because they were saying that where people are coming from in Zambia and all of those places, they have an executive president who is strong, who can do anything as he wishes. We don't want that because of the experiences that we know of. So these were their fears. Also, on one hand, you had people from SWAPO who point a finger and say, you want to reserve schools for white people. Where have you seen that in a country whose residents, a majority are black? Why would you want to reserve reservations for schools? So it already triggers that these people, they don't want apartheid to end. They still want to maintain the status quo. So there were the fears from both sides. As I say, depending where you sit from, you have to toil and understand what gives rise to those fears. And I think this is the blueprint that Namibia has created for the world, to say we can have very many differences, but how do we create a blueprint that satisfies both our interests? That is why our constitution is the best compromise that we could ever come with at that point in time.
It's by pure coincidence, Doc, that we're having this conversation this week. If you have followed Parliament and the rhetoric of the opposition in recent days, there's been talks about centralized power, to say we can't have power centralized in the president. And that emanates essentially from the conversation around moving oil to the presidency now. And when I was reading your book, there's a part that dealt with that already in 1989, where the likes of Dirk Maj were saying, look, we don't want, and it's what you're alluding to also now, that we don't want power too centralized in the president, because in fact, Dirk Maj said, under such arrangements, ministers who are part of the executive, of course, are simply glorified members of parliament. How do you think our constitution has come this far insofar as the subject is concerned? Do you think, how did we carry ourselves? How did the president, whoever has been the president, exercise that power that is so centralized in the eyes of some?
Compared to the proposals in 89, the president's powers have been diluted a lot.
Yeah.
We are one of those few countries in the world where the president is given names to appoint judges.
Yeah.
Whereas if you take the example of the United States, the president nominates judges, then they get to be confirmed by the Senate. Here, you have a Judicial Service Commission that make recommendations to the president. And then it's not that the president must decline. He's given a name to say, appoint Toivo as Chief Justice. You get appointed. So that's how the powers were diluted. If you look at, there are a number of positions, Auditor General is appointed similarly. The Ombudsman also is appointed in that manner. It's not that the president can handpick anyone and say, I'm making you Ombudsman tomorrow. You remember, I think it was 1997, when then President Nyoma appointed another person as Ombudsman without going through the JC. President Nyoma, when that was pointed out to him, he immediately withdrew that appointment and followed the process that is recommended in terms of the law. So that's how the president have handled themselves. Yeah. There will be issues to say appointment of ministers. Those are people that serve at the pleasure of the president. The president can literally handpick anyone that he or she wants to become a member of his or her cabinet.
Yeah.
So there will be political decisions. Then there will be those powers where there is constraints on how the president exercises those powers. We are unique in the world in the sense that the Constitution makes provision to say the executive power rests in the president and cabinet. In most countries, the executive power rests in the president. But here, the president shares that power with her cabinet. So that's how the power was diluted. And I think people should not worry too much because there are always safeguards. Most of these executive decisions, they're subject to review.
Yeah.
So if one person is unhappy, member of parliament can ask a question in parliament. Or if you think that certain things were done incorrectly, you can go to court.
Yeah.
Because the courts are substantively independent. And I think we should be very glad about that, because in some countries we hear where the Minister of Justice maybe writes a judgment and give it to a judge to read. Or they say, we've seen countries where the government does not lose cases. Here we lose every day.
Yeah. Yeah.
We lose every day because of the independence of the judiciary.
Absolutely.
We sometimes don't agree. I mean, being in government, there are decisions that you think that we don't agree. But that's been pronounced for by an independent body. So we have to accept all of it. If you're not happy, you appeal. If you lose appeal, that's the end of the story.
Yeah, absolutely. Doc, where can the launch is on Monday? What can you tell us about the launch? What can you tell us about where the book can be found afterwards?
The launch is taking place on Monday, 8:30 at NEPAM. We have interesting lineup on the program. President Mvumba, former President Mvumba, will launch the book. He will deliver the keynote address. We also have a special guest, former President of Botswana, Dr. Mokwesi Masisi, who will, together with President Mvumba, there will be a sort of a Q&A session after the keynote address, really in the context of Southern Africa. Yeah. Where do you locate constitutionalism? And also the role that was played by especially the frontline states and Nigeria, how Namibia's independence came about. So it's really that how the constitutionalism in the context of the regional of Southern Africa, how we locate Namibia there. So that's a small dialogue that is going to take place there, and everyone else is invited. The books will be available. The book will be available on sale on that day. We will also announce on that day where it will be available in bookshops countrywide.
Absolutely. Yeah. Again, Doc, congratulations. I have had only a snippet of the book, but I'm already so much looking forward to reading the whole of it, the remainder of it. Congratulations and all the best for Monday.
Thank you so very much.
Yeah. That's Dr. Audrin Mathe. He is the author of The Art of Persuasion. It's a new book dropping on Monday in Windhoek. And he was here to give us snippets of what can be found in the book. Thank you for watching.